Geometry Dash! I'll bring my backpack in case you tell me to stay.
Okay, take about 1 more minute to see if you can find anything the author assumed you knew. 1 more minute.
I haven't found anything.
Bro, what did I do? What did I do? Put the volume on. No. No.
Okay, really quickly. What are some things that stood out to you that the author assumed you knew that made it a little more difficult to read this? Tell me one thing, Lydia.
What was so great about Ramses the Great?
So, you assume that, they assume that you've heard of some of these people, right? That you know who Ramses the Great was and the things that Ramses did, or that you know who Amenhotep was. Good, what else?
I don't know who are.
Yeah, there are a bunch of names, right?
Who was Lou? That's a big one.
Lou, Twinkie, Little Monkey.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about, that's my favorite example in this entire thing. Okay, they're talking about what a dynasty is, and I listened to this group,
Funky
this
Goose
group, when they
Monkey
first started, they were
for
like, what is a dynasty? The author doesn't tell us, and then the first thing, oh wait, there it is, what is a dynasty? But then the author goes on to try to explain what a dynasty is by talking about the 1920s New York Yankees. How many of you can tell us about the 1920s New York Yankees? Probably like 3 of us, maybe.
No.
Okay.
Rodrigo.
So the author here is making an assumption that all of you are really knowledgeable about Major League Baseball in the United States. Because the New York Yankees were a team and they happened to have a bunch of really good players in the 1920s and they were almost unbeatable. But if you don't care about baseball or know about baseball or live in the United States or follow the Yankees, you might not know any of that. And the author is making a pretty big assumption by using the Yankees as the example to teach you about dynasties.
But it did say that the Yankees were a really good baseball team and they were leading the league and
Yes,
to beat them.
so it explained a little bit, right? But it's still probably not the best example because
Because we don't know the players that made it good.
yeah,
Well, then you
I
can
could have just
use
said
them.
it's a line of things.
right, they could have simplified it, right? They tried to get a little too fancy maybe. So, did anybody get to some of the locations or the Hyksos people?
Great Sphinx. What's Thebes?
Yeah, Thebes. What is Thebes? It's talking about Thebes, but what is Thebes?
Person that
Thebes is a
steals.
place, but if you don't know where Thebes is or what's important about Thebes, talking about Thebes is kind of a waste of time. It talks about the Hyksos people, and I like that it explains them as a Semitic Asiatic people. Anybody know what that means?
Nope.
Not really, right? Okay, so as you read, it's really important to take note
No, he
of
looks
those
like Ding Dong
things.
Ditch.
What did the author assume I need to know? Because maybe I might need to look some of this up. Maybe it will be helpful in understanding. Okay, I want to stop there.
Read aloud.
Because I want to do a little bit of read aloud.
Ryan, look at my Jolly Rancher
So,
robot.
if you would, while I
My
do read
Jolly
aloud,
Rancher robot.
number 1, please don't make me talk over top of you.
1v1.
And what?
You said you were looking right out there, you guys. Okay, so please don't make me read
Alright,
over
get the
top of
green
your
screen.
voices.
Wait, hold on.
If you would, on your tables, just stack these papers stack these papers up and I'll deal with them. Okay, here we go. Joseph, when we left off, was on the train and he had decided to test whether or not you could actually tell a quote-unquote real German from a Jew. So he took off his Star of David armband, and do we need, by the way, is this a spot where the author has assumed you know something?
Yeah.
So the Star of David armband. If you're confused about that, during this time of Nazi rule in Germany, I think we're hopefully all aware
But
that
it already
Hitler,
explained that.
what?
It explained why they were wearing those.
Yeah, like, so the Star of David is a Jewish symbol, and they were forced to wear it to show everybody I'm Jewish so that they could be mistreated further. But if they didn't wear it, they could get in more trouble. Okay. So Joseph dropped his Star of David armband on the ground, and a Hitler Youth picked it up. Here we go.
This was apparently his friend.
No, it wasn't his friend, so it flashed back to a similar story
Oh.
where he had a friend who was dressed as a Hitler Youth and ended up beating him up. The Hitler Youth led Joseph down the narrow corridor of the German passenger car. Tears sprang to Joseph's eyes. The brown shirt who had taken his father away on Kristallnacht had said, "We'll come for you soon enough." But Joseph hadn't waited. He'd gone to them with this stupid stunt. They came to a compartment with a man in the uniform of a Nazi secret state police, and Joseph stumbled. The Gestapo man looked at them through the window of his door. "No, not here, not now, not like this," Joseph prayed. And the Hitler Youth boy pushed Joseph on past. They came to the door of the Jewish train car, and the Hitler Youth spun Joseph around. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "What were you thinking?" the boy whispered. Joseph couldn't speak. The boy thrust the armband
Party.
in Joseph's chest. "Put that on, and don't ever do that again," the Hitler Youth told Joseph. "Do you understand?" Yes, stammered Joseph. "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." The Hitler Youth breathed hard, his face red like he was the one in trouble. He spotted the piece of candy Joseph had bought for Ruth, and he took it. He stood taller, tugged at the bottom of his brown shirt to straighten it, and then turned and marched away. Joseph slipped back into his compartment, still shaking, and collapsed onto his bench. He stayed there for the rest of the trip, his armband securely in place and as visible as possible. He didn't even leave to go to the bathroom. Hours later, the train pulled into Hamburg Central Railway Station. Joseph's mother led him and his sister through the crowds to the Hamburg docks where the ship awaited them. Joseph had never seen anything so big. If you stood the ship on end, it would have been taller than any building in Berlin. Two giant tan smokestacks stuck up from the middle of the ship, one of them belching gray-black diesel engine smoke. A steep ramp ran to the top of the tall black hole, and hundreds of people were already on board, milling around under colorful fluttering pennants and waving to friends and family down on the docks. Flying highest above them all, as if to remind everyone who was actually in charge, was the red and white Nazi flag with the black swastika in the middle.
Did diesel already exist?
The ship was called the MS St. Louis. St. Louis was the name of the city in America, Joseph had learned. That seemed like a good omen to him, a sign that they would eventually get to America, maybe one day visit the real St. Louis. A shabby-looking man stumbled out from behind the crates and luggage piled up on the dock, and Ruthie screamed. Joseph jumped, and his mother took a frightened step back. The man reached out for them. "You made it at last." That voice, thought Joseph. Could it really be? The man threw his arms around Mama. She let him hug her, even though she still held her hands across her chest, as if to ward him off. He stepped back and held her at arm's length. "My dearest Rachel," he said, "I thought I'd never see you again." It was him. The shabby man who had lurched from the shadows like an escapee from a mental asylum was Joseph's father, Aaron Landau. Joseph shuddered. His papa looked nothing like the man who had been dragged away from their home 6 months ago. His thick brown hair and beard had been shaved off, and his head and face was covered with a scraggly stubble. He was thinner, too thin, a skeleton in a threadbare suit 3 sizes too big for him. Aaron Landau's eyes bulged from his gaunt face as he turned to look at his children. Joseph's breath caught in his throat, and Ruthie cried out and buried her face in Joseph's stomach as their papa pulled the two of them into a hug. He smelled so right, like the alley behind the butcher shop, that Joseph had to turn his head away. "Joseph, Ruth, my darlings," he kissed the tops of their heads again and again, then jumped back. He looked around maniacally, like there were spies everywhere. "We have to go. We can't stay here. We have to get on board before they stop us." "I have tickets, Mama said, visas." Papa shook his head too quickly. "It doesn't matter," he said. His eyes looked like they were going to pop out of their sockets. "They'll stop us. They'll take me back." Ruthie clung to her brother. Papa was scaring her. He scared Joseph, too. Hurry, Papa said. He pulled the family with him into the stacks of crates, and Joseph tried to keep up with him as he darted from place to place, dodging imaginary enemies. Joseph gave his mother a frightened glance that said, "What's wrong with Papa?" Mama just shook her head with eyes full of worry. When they got close to the ramp, Papa hunkered down behind the last of the crates. On the count of 3, we make a break for it, he told his family. Don't stop. Don't stop for anything. We have to get on that ship. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
Blast off.
Joseph wasn't ready. None of them were. They watched as Aaron Landau ran for the ramp while the other passengers had already queued up to hand their tickets to a smiling man in a sailor's uniform. Joseph's father threw himself past the sailor and stumbled onto the ramp's railing right before he righted himself and sprinted up the gangway. "Wait!" the sailor cried. "Quickly now, children," Mama said. Together they hurried up the ramp as best they could, carrying all the suitcases. "I have this ticket," she told the sailor. "I'm sorry, we can wait our turn." The startled man at the front of the line motioned for them to go ahead, and Joseph's mother thanked him. "My husband is just eager to leave," she told the sailor. He smiled sadly and punched their tickets. "I understand. Oh, let me get someone to help you with those bags. Porter?" Joseph stood in wonder as another sailor, a German man without a star painted on them, a man who wasn't a Jew, put a suitcase under each arm and one in each hand and led them up the gangway. He treated them like real passengers, like real people. And he wasn't the only one. Every sailor they met doffed his cap with them, and the steward who showed them to their cabin assured them that they could call upon him for anything they needed while on board. Anything at all. The room was spotless, the bed linens were freshly laundered, and the hand towels were pressed and neatly stacked. "It's a trick," Papa said when the door was closed. He glanced around the little cabin like the walls were closing in. "They'll come for us soon enough," he said. It was just what the brown shirt had told Joseph. Mama put her hands on Joseph and Ruthie said, "Why don't you two go up on the promenade?" she said softly. "I'll stay here with your papa." Joseph and Ruth were only too glad to get away from Papa. A few hours later, they watched from the promenade as tugboats pushed the MS St. Louis away from the dock, and passengers threw confetti and celebrated and blew tearful kisses goodbye. Joseph and his family were on their way to a new country, a new life. But all Joseph could think about was what terrible things must have happened to his father to make him look so awful and act so scared. Isabel. Remember, Isabel's father was part of the riot in Havana, and he was threatened by the police officer. Isabel and her grandfather sat her puppy in a chair in their little kitchen. Isabel's mother, Teresa, ran to the cabinet under the sink. Isabel hurried after her. Mommy was very pregnant. She was due in a week's time, so Isabel knelt down to find the iodine.
He was doing the week thing.
Isabel's father, Rivaldo Fernandez, had always been a handsome man, but he didn't look it now. There was blood in his hair, and the area around one of his eyes was already turning black. When they pulled his white linen shirt off of him, his back was covered with welts. Isabel watched as Mommy cleaned up his cuts with a washcloth. Poppy hissed as she disinfected them with the iodine. "What happened?" her mother asked. An Industriales baseball game was on the TV in the corner, and Isabel's grandfather turned down the volume. "There was a riot on the Malecon," Vito said. "They ran out of food too fast." "I can't stay here," Poppy said. His head was bent low, but his voice was loud and clear. "Not any longer. They'll come for me." Everyone was quiet at that. The only sound was the soft crack of a bat and the roar of the crowd on TV. Poppy had already tried to flee Cuba twice. The first time, he and 3 other men had built a raft and tried to paddle their way to Florida, but a tropical storm turned them back. The second time, his boat had a motor, but he'd been caught by the Cuban Navy and ended up in jail. Now it was even harder to escape.
Sorry.
Okay, guys? Now it was even harder to escape. For decades, the United States had rescued Cuban refugees they found at sea and taken them to Florida. But the food shortage had driven more and more Cubans to El Norte. Too many. The Americans had a new policy everyone called wet foot and dry foot. If Cuban refugees were caught at sea with quote-unquote wet feet, they were sent to the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay at the southern end of Cuba. From there, they could choose to return to Cuba and Castro or languish in a refugee camp while the United States decided what to do with them. But if they managed to survive the trip across the Straits of Florida and evade the U.S. Coast Guard and actually set foot on U.S. soil, be called dry feet, they were granted special refugee status and allowed to remain and become U.S. citizens. Poppy was going to try to run away again. And this time, whether he got caught with wet feet or dry feet, he wasn't coming back. No reason to go throwing yourself onto a raft in the ocean, Lito said. You can just lie low for a while. I know a little shack in the cane fields. Things will get better, you'll see. Poppy slammed a fist on the table. And how exactly are they going to get better, Mariano? Do you think the Soviet Union is going to suddenly decide to get back together and start sending us food again? No one is coming to help us, and Castro's only making things worse. As if saying his name made him appear, the baseball game on television was interrupted by a special message from the Cuban president. Fidel Castro was an old man with liver spots on his forehead, gray hair, a big bushy gray beard, and bags under his eyes. He wore the same thing he did every time he was on TV, a green military jacket and a flat round cap, and he sat behind a row of microphones. Everyone got quiet as Lito turned up the volume. Castro condemned the violence that had broken out on the Malecon, blaming it on U.S. agents. Papa scoffed. It wasn't U.S. agents, it was hungry Cubans. Castro rambled on without a script, quoting novels and telling personal anecdotes about the revolution. Oh, turn it off, Poppy said. But before Mommy had reached the set, Castro said something that made them all sit up and listen. We cannot continue guarding the borders of the United States while they send their CIA to instigate riots in Havana. That is when incidents like this occur, and the world calls the Cuban government cruel and inhumane. And so, until there is a speedy and efficient solution, we are suspending all obstacles to those who wish to leave Cuba, and they may do so legally once and for all. We will not stand in their way. What did he just say, Mommy asked? Poppy's eyes were wide as he stood from the kitchen table. Castro just said anyone who wants to leave can leave. Isabel felt as though her heart had been ripped out of her chest. If Castro was letting anyone leave, her father would be gone before the sun rose the next day. She could see it in his wild look. You can't go now, Lito told Poppy. You have a family to take care of, a wife, a daughter, a son on the way. Isabel's father and grandfather yelled at each other about dictators and freedom and families and responsibility. Lito was her mother's father, and he and Poppy had never gotten along. Isabel covered her ears and stepped away. She had to think of some answer to this, some solution that would keep her family together. Then she had it. We'll all go, Isabel cried. Well, that shut everybody up. Even Castro stopped talking and the TV went back to showing the baseball game. No, Poppy and Lito said at the same time. Why not, Isabel said. Well, your mother's pregnant for one thing, Lito said. There's no food to feed the baby here anyway, Isabel said. There's no food for any of us and no money to buy it even if there was food. But there is food in the United States, and freedom and work. And a place where her father wouldn't be beaten or arrested or run away. We'll all go, while Castro's letting people out, she said. Lito too. No, but no, Lito protested. They were all quiet a moment more until her father said, but I don't even have a boat. Isabel nodded. She could fix that too. Without saying anything, Isabel ran next door to Castillo's house. Luis, the older boy who'd saved her father from the policeman's nightstick, wasn't home from work yet, and neither was his mother, who worked at the cooperative law office. But Isabel found Ivan and his father, Rudy, right where she thought they'd be, working on their boat in the shed. It was an ugly blue thing cobbled together on old metal advertisements and road signs and oil drums. It barely qualified as a boat, but it was big enough for the 4 Castillos and maybe 4 more guests. Well, if it isn't Hurricane Isabel, Senor Castillo said. He had white hair that he wore swept back on his head, and even though there was no food, he had a middle-aged paunch to his belly. You have to take us with you, Isabel said. No, we don't, Senor Castillo said. Ivan nailed. People are rioting in Havana, Isabel said. Tell me something I don't know. Ivan, nail. Ivan handed him another nail. My father was almost arrested, Isabel said. If you don't take us with you, they'll throw him in prison. Senor Castillo paused his hammering for a moment, then shook his head. There's no room, and we don't need a fugitive on board. Ivan looked at him funny, but only Isabel saw it. Please, Isabel begged. We don't have any gasoline anyway, Ivan said. He put his hand to the motorcycle motor they'd mounted inside the boat. We're not going anywhere anytime soon. I can fix that, Isabel said. She ran home again. Her father and grandfather were still arguing in the kitchen, so she slipped in the back way. She grabbed her trumpet, gave it one long sad look, and ran out the back door. She was already in the street when she stopped, ran to her backyard, and snatched up the little kitten, too. With the trumpet in one arm and the kitten in the other, she ran a few blocks to the beach, where she banged on the door of the fisherman her grandfather knew. His gas-powered fishing boat rocked gently in the pier. The fisherman came to the door, licking his fingers and frowning. Isabel had caught him at dinner. Fried fish, it smelled like. The kitten's nose sniffed eagerly at the air and meowed. Isabel's stomach growled. You're Mariano Padron's granddaughter, aren't you? What do you want?
Go in.
I need gasoline, she told him. that so? Well, I need money. I don't have any money, Isabel said, but I have this. She held out the trumpet. Isabel regretted that its brass was a little tarnished, but it was the most valuable thing she owned. The fisherman had to take it in a trade. What am I going to do with that, he asked. Sell it, Isabel told him. It's French and old and it plays like a dream. The fisherman sighed. Why do you need gasoline so badly? To leave Cuba before my father is arrested. The fisherman wiped his lips on the back of his hand. Isabel stood for what seemed like hours, her insides churning like a water spout. At last, he reached out and took the trumpet. Wait here, he told her. She held her breath, and soon the fisherman came back with 2 enormous plastic jugs of gasoline. Each one came up to her chest. Is it enough, she asked, to get you to Miami? Yes, and back again. Isabel's heart soared, and she hopped up and down. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, she told him. Oh, and you have to take the kitten, too. She held the wiggling creature out to him, but the old fisherman just stared at it. Is that so, the fisherman said. Please, or someone else will catch her and eat her. But you have fish to eat. She can eat your scraps. Is it a good mouser? Yes, her name is Leona. The fisherman took her. Oh, and I need to go before he goes back. Get out of here, go to lunch.
Oh, Papa, time.
Pablo, is the computer okay? Good.
Yay!
Is the baby okay?
I'm still streaming.
Can I see her? Can I check something?
Go eat.
Put volume. Put volume.
Get out of here.
Vamos,